And I would ask that everybody stays muted so that we don't get any background noise when we have the speakers speaking. So thank you very much for that. And maybe now we could bow our heads to open with a little prayer. I'm taking our prayer today from the latest Fratelli Tutti. So it is a prayer that our Pope himself has written. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, Father of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, and war. May our hearts be open to all the peoples and nations of the earth. May we recognize the goodness and beauty that you have sown in each of us, and thus forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. O God, Trinity of love, from the profound communion of your divine life, pour out upon us a torrent of fraternal love. Grant us the love reflected in the actions of Jesus, in his family of Nazareth, and in the early Christian community. Grant that we Christians may live the gospel, discovering Christ in each human being, recognizing him crucified in the sufferings of the abandoned and forgotten of our world, risen in each brother or sister who makes a new start. Come, Holy Spirit, show us your beauty reflected in all the peoples of the earth, so that we may discover anew that all are important and all are necessary, different faces of the one humanity that God so loves. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, welcome again. A quick reminder again, remember the recording. If you do not wish to be in the recording, switch off your audio. If you want to make a comment or you want to ask a question, please use the chat facility. This is the fifth of our 6 workshops on diversity, inequality, and racism in the United Kingdom. Today's workshop is on ethnicity, identity, and belonging. And I'm most grateful that we have today Father Phil Sumner, a diocesan parish priest, but also a trustee to the Catholic Association for Racial Justice, who will now speak to us. Father Phil Sumner.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, I hope. And it's this one. So I hope everybody can see that. And you're very welcome again. I'm going to start with the slideshow, and hopefully, there we are from the beginning. Okay, so the changing face of Britain, I'm sure you can see from that first slide. That's myself with 2 choirs, a Filipino choir and an African choir. And we were singing in Salford Cathedral, a sense of leading the liturgy from those different perspectives, from the Filipino perspective, from the African perspective, in the cathedral church itself. There are different identities that we're going to refer to today, and different people of different identities are desperate, I would say, to belong in our society. The first one that I'm going to refer to, somebody from Holy Cross wanting admitting, I'll just do that. First one is by Dina Nayeri, who wrote a book published in 2019 called The Ungrateful Refugee. You see her there on the screen. And she writes, as a refugee, what she considers the particular needs of that community are. A common complaint among refugees: the future brings anxiety because you don't belong and can't move forward. The past brings depression because you can't go home, your memories fade, and everything you know is gone. The next particular quote that I would use from her, she's speaking about the refugees again and saying they need dignity of becoming an essential part of society. What they most urgently need is to be useful, to belong to a place. And if that's going to happen, there's got to be, as she says, reciprocation. It's a mutual and humble process in which we become intertwined with multiculturalism, never at odds with multiculturalism. And this is about newcomers being able to affect you on your native soil, to change you. That can be a bit worrying to some of our communities, of course. It means they have to change. They can't just stay the same when newcomers come in. So Nayeri says it's intertwined with multiculturalism, never at odds with it. We have to go to the seminal essay on multiculturalism written by Charles Taylor in 1992. And you'll know, of course, that since that time, many people have begun to complain about multiculturalism. It was something that was just accepted in our schools and in our communities. And then people began to come in and claim that it wasn't the right approach. Taylor was always absolutely clear that it was based on equal dignity of every person and a person finding and being his or her true self. But one of the problems that people have with identity in the academic circles is that it's seen to be too essentialist, too stuck, and people hark back to an identity that's not really them because things move on. But that's not what Taylor in that seminal essay referred to. He said it's a dynamic concept. It's always being discovered dialogically, always developing. So it's certainly not something that's essentialist and stuck in a mode. It's always changing. Other people built on his ideas: Will Kimlicka, Bhikkhu Parekh, Tariq Madood, and others. And perhaps for me, the Madood element of this that I'm going to home in on is that he describes the identities that you really do need to nurture. Because some people have argued that you can't deal with every identity. It just becomes too much. And Madood talks about necessary and stigmatized identities. So what's a necessary identity? If you're looking at, obviously, a person's color, you can't change that. It's just you. Look at a person's sexuality. Again, I would say, and I think modern science says, you can't change that. It's you. It's about accepting that. And if it comes to religion, that's a new element of multiculturalism in a sense that has begun to cause the problem. But I would argue again that religion, as a Catholic, I became a Catholic because my parents were Catholic. So many Muslims become Muslims because their parents were Muslim. And it's just passed on. Okay, you might say we choose to stay in that religion later on, and so many people do leave it, but we've been affected by it. It's become a part of our identity in a very special way that you can't get rid of, in a sense. Even people who've left the Catholic Church might still genuflect when they come out of a cinema, if you know what I mean. But again, this multiculturalism, people have picked on different models of multiculturalism and then criticized it. So in the Dutch model of multiculturalism, this is about people in their own little groups all the time, very segregated, what people would call pillarization rather than multiculturalism. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something that brings communities together. The Stephen Lawrence inquiry way back talked about the importance of the not being colorblind, that being colorblind, when people say, I don't see color, that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. That's part of institutional racism. When you see color, you see that a person is different, and you begin, I hope, to recognize what those differences are and those different needs of those groups of people are. And you can only find that out by listening, by asking. You can't be stereotypical and say, oh, I know what you need. You have to do an awful lot of listening. But a colorblind approach is absolutely out, according to the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. Many people have forgotten that. When the community cohesion agenda started to come in, there were three elements that were very much a part, three pillars of that particular agenda. Identity, engagement, which was both participation in the public realm and interaction, and also equality. Now, identity after a while began to be dropped out. Why? Because in 2011, David Cameron, Angela Merkel, and Nicolas Sarkozy all decided that they had a problem with multiculturalism. And I would suggest it was because they saw themselves as dealing with the world of Islam. Can we just ask somebody to turn off their audio, because it gets very distracting to hear. So Merkel, Sarkozy, and Cameron all saw the coming into the societies of people from Muslim backgrounds being a problem, because people, they said, were not sufficiently liberal and they weren't accepting British values. So that was the reason for so much change, I would suggest. And the use of this term British values in education became so important. And what did it mean? It meant that people who were seen to be or perceived to be of illiberal backgrounds had first to accept British values and those liberal, so-called liberal values of British background. The term interculturalism also came in as another way of dealing, of going forward. Interculturalism came from the Quebec experience, where people wanted to ensure that people, when they came into a community, spoke French as well as English. And so if you're coming in from outside, you weren't as equal in a sense until you'd learnt to speak French. So there was that interculturalism. So in other words, everybody's equal, but some are more equal than others. When you come into a society, you have to accept some aspects of that society. And integrationism is another word that was brought in, where the British government has gone down the road of integrationism, which is about, it's not about assimilation. It's not the same as assimilation. It is people bringing something of who they are into the society, but within that, accepting British values. So the importance of being integrated. Ted Cantle, one of the major proponents of interculturalism and community cohesion, and a writer of the various reports at the time of the riots in 2001, he regards interaction as the most important element of creating community cohesion. For me, I think he's wrong. I think that you don't get good interaction unless you've addressed the identity. I'm going to come back to that later. And addressing identity, according to literature, people in literature, has been so important for so many years. One of the achievers in Black writing, a fellow called Chamoiseau from Martinique, got the Prix de Goncourt from France, from Paris, for his writing. I think it was Texaco he wrote, but he also wrote a book called School Days. And in School Days, it's only a short book, and you see, it's an easy book to read, a young lad from Martinique, coming from a Martinican background where they spoke patois. When he went into school, the teacher insisted on everybody speaking French, Parisian French, and don't be bringing your patois rubbish into school with you here. And it was that sense of being put down straight away, where in the story you see the tremendous curiosity that this child had at the beginning for education simply disappearing. all motivation for education going. That's basically the story of school days from Chamoiseau. Toni Morrison wrote her first book, The Bluest Eye, which is basically a story of a young girl growing up in 1930s America of African-American descent. And she wanted to be like Shirley Temple, having blue eyes, because that's from all the messages going out in society, that's what you had to be if you're going to be valued in that society. Afua Hirsch, in her British, is desperately searching for a sense of belonging. She goes back to Ghana, thinking that she can only find it there, and knows eventually that she can't. The Good Immigrant, there's the two books, The Good Immigrant. One's an English, British version, and one's an American version. All different people writing about what's important to them. And in one of those essays, in one of those books, the English version, you have Darren Chetty, who's a teacher in London. You see him there. And he quotes Mallory Blackman on Sky News. He says, I think there's a very significant message that goes out when you cannot see yourself at all in the books that you're reading. I think it's saying, well, you may be here, but you don't really belong. So if the literature that you read in school is all about, you know, the 1800s and Charles Dickens and all the rest of it, it's great and very important and great literature. But people from African descent, from other backgrounds, Asian descent backgrounds, need to be able to find in some literature that you're doing something themselves. One of the problems is that the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority, quite a few years ago now, recognized this as being important. But the books that they suggested on their list of suggested reading for people of African descent were all African. So people like Ngugi, Achebe, Okri, people like that. There was no mention of African Americans or African Caribbean British. And so people that have been through and see as part of their background, part of their identity, the whole lack of acceptance of who they are because of their color throughout society would be more likely to be African American or African descent British, African Caribbean British. So then when Mr. Gove came in, he got rid of all that anyway. So much of it was just gone. And what came in instead was even more focus on the traditional. Yes, of course, Shakespeare is massively important. Of course, Dickens is massively important, but it's how we also get across. So even if you're reading Shakespeare in the sonnets, you'll know that maybe in the sonnets, there's the reference to the love of Shakespeare's life, who happens to be, suggested anyway, a Black woman. It's in the sonnets there, but you can look that for yourself. In the film world, Jan Demange, who you see there, again, writing the long answer in the American version of The Good Immigrant, he says, this being an outsider and seeking a sense of belonging is something I can now see has been a theme running throughout all my work so far. So again and again, people from the different backgrounds of our communities are saying to belong is massively important. And even the government, in a recent document by Deeds and Their Results from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, suggested that there were 4 pillars for building strong communities, one of which is trust, connectedness, and yes, belonging. So you can see, again, this importance of belonging coming out. From a brief theological perspective on this, every person, this is from the compendium of the social doctrine of the church, every person, family, and intermediate group has something original to offer the community. But we need to see what that is. We need to listen to hear what that is. And then in the Novo Millennio Iniunte, when we were entering into the new millennium, the Pope John Paul II at that time said, he talked about the communion of spirituality. And that communion of spirituality is where we see what's positive in others, to welcome it and to prize it, in fact, as a gift from God, to know how to make room for our brothers and sisters and to bear each other's burdens. And then again, going back to the Compendium of Social Doctrine of the Church, there's dedication to the inculturation of the Christian message. What's that? This is one of the themes that John Paul II brought out again and again in some of his works. It's this productive encounter between the gospel and the various branches of knowledge. So you don't just transfer Christianity from Britain to Africa, taking all the elements of who you are as a British person and a missionary going to Africa. You have to be able to engage with the African continent, with the people, the knowledge and the branches of knowledge in the African continent, and be able to interpret the gospel through that particular language, that particular culture as well. So all those elements from a theological perspective, again, also important. I was 25 years as a priest in Moss Side in Manchester until the riots happened in Oldham when I was transferred up here. But just to share some of the lessons learned from those 25 years as a priest in Moss Side, there was a large African descent population there, which I'm sure you've heard about, but it was severely discriminated against. And because of that, when many people from African Caribbean backgrounds came to this country and went to a Catholic church, they felt as though they'd dropped off the moon. People looked at them as though they were strange. And so they went elsewhere. They went to so-called black-led churches. And often, I know people who've become very successful ministers of black-led churches. They had so much to offer, but it was never tapped into because of the failure to be able to enable them to belong when they came here. In Moss Side, I learned an awful lot from a woman, a clinical psychologist, Dr. Jocelyn Maxime, who's a clinical psychologist actually from London. And she did a whole study on the importance of identity nurturing in education. And she showed that if you take 3 different groups, the one that, even if you do Saturday schools and things like that, you're still not getting the motivation for education that you need. Whereas in the 3rd group she took, this where they did identity nurturing, they actually retain the motivation for education right the way through the course of their education. People that saw this as being important back then, one was the Leicester Education Authority, and it published this document called Young, Gifted and Equal. And in that document, it took every key stage area, every subject area, and then went through a series of performance indicators to show what you should be doing if you were nurturing identity through those curriculum areas. So, for example, in maths, whether you would mention the importance of 0 and where that comes from, whether you'd mention the importance of cosines and sines and where that's come from, from Islam, again, the mixture of Islam with the rest of academic society at the time. So all of that comes through. Another thing that's important is you don't treat people equally by treating them the same. Now that might be almost a recognized statement within most inner urban areas. But when I said that on The Moral Maze, Michael Portillo thought this was some Sumner paradox, he called it, something that I'd brought up that was absolutely new. There are obviously people that are in power, on the side of power, you know, that are like Michael Portillo, who have no idea of the importance that to treat people equally, you've got to be able to recognize their different needs. And if you don't recognize their different needs, you're not going to be able to treat them equally. It's certainly not about treating them the same. In Manchester, we used to have a Greater Manchester Police philosophy saying we treat everybody the same, irrespective of sexuality, background, etc., etc. And I used to say to them, look, you've got to say treating people equally, but also respecting those differences rather than irrespective of those differences. So again, you've got to know those differences. Established groups in the exercise of power is another element of institutional racism that comes in to stop this happening. the established groups saying, we've always done it this way. Why should we change? So you see a picture there of the cathedral in Johannesburg, which I visited in 2001. And going into that, I thought, there's not a sense of Africanness in this cathedral. It's as if it's been dropped from, you know, a cathedral from Europe and just there. And yet we had a mass with a group of priests, bishops, and religious sisters and others. And a religious sister prepared the liturgy, and it shouted with all the objet d'art that she used, with the type of things that, you know, the colors scheme that she used, the language that was used, it shouted of Africa. So why can it not be in the public buildings that we have as well? In terms of multiculturalism, again, it's important that it's Tariq Madood, who's one of the big proponents of multiculturalism. It's not just anti-discrimination, the sameness of treatment, that same thing going out. You don't treat people equally by treating them the same. And it's not the simple toleration of difference. It's also the respect for difference. But again, you've got to know what those differences are, which means a lot of listening. Genuine equality requires dropping the pretense of difference blindness and allows marginalized minorities also to be visible and explicitly accommodated in the public sphere so that all can enjoy a sense of belonging. Again, it comes in that if you're going to belong, your difference has got to be recognized. There's statements through art and decoration I've referred to already, but what do I mean? In my church here, for example, we have 2 stained glass windows at the moment. We've got more than 2, but 2 of them, the Polish community came up to me and said, can we have a stained glass window that represents us? Now it costs £10,000 to £12,000 for each of these stained glass windows. It's a big commitment. But the Polish window there with the Pope John Paul II, Krakow, Wadowice, where he was born, Częstochowa, and the top with the Black Madonna, all of these were parts of their identity seen in the very fabric of the building. So when you come into the building, there's something of me here, and it makes a massive difference. The other one is the Filipino building, stained glass window, with 2 of the Filipino saints. They got together in the Filipino community, they collected the money together, and they wanted 2 of their saints to be represented. And again, when they come in, it's noticeable now that people from African descent, from Filipino descent, we've got people from over 50 odd nationalities, which we didn't have at the beginning. They come, they drive past 2 or 3 churches, Catholic churches, to come here because of the messages that we give in what we do. The use of color and artwork. So at the bottom picture of the screen, you'll see an image of what looks like an image from the Caribbean of people getting together, almost a Pentecostal get together. This was done by a Black artist working with the children in, I think, year 9 of our secondary school at the time. I gave them the job to say, can you do something working together to say something of Africanness, African Caribbean nature that can go on the wall in our church, so that when people come in the door, they see this straight away. This is what they did. 22 years later, it's still there. I've been gone 20 years from that church. It's still there. It's a mark of the people themselves, the students, feeling this is part of them now. And it's an important statement as they come in the door. Of course, if you're going to decorate the church, decorate altar frontals and things like that, or lectern frontals, why not use Kente cloth or something like that? This has been used many times by myself. And again, it just speaks to people from Ghana, from other parts of Africa, that says you're present too. Putting these lessons into practice, we also have every year an Advent celebration where the different choirs, we have different whole series. I've only put 3 down here at the bottom. We have 5 different choirs here. So there on the bottom left, you have an Iranian choir. Middle, you have the African choir. Right, you have the Filipino choir. They'd be singing the Filipino choir sing every second Sunday of the month. They would do all the parts, the Kyrie, the Gloria, the Sanctus, and the offertory hymn. Likewise, on the last Sunday of the month, it's the time of the African choir. On the first Sunday of the month is the time of the Indian choir, who are not up there at the moment, but they too are in existence. So it's that way of being part of the fabric of the church again. But here you see them, we have an international music festival, and they really put their heart and soul into it. And they're proud of who they are every year when it comes out to this particular event. Obviously, we couldn't do it this year because of COVID. And they take leadership roles that are obvious in the church because of this choir leadership and things like that. The artwork that we use, I've already spoken about. Also, dancing the gospel in is something very important again to some communities, and dancing the offertory gifts in, offertory processions. When it comes to summer and Christmas fairs, people, when we first started having these fairs, people from the African and Caribbean communities just didn't come. Why? I asked. Well, it's pretty obvious, because there was nothing of them. It was all a very British thing. So we started putting on food, started putting on karaoke run by the Filipino community. They wanted to do that. So it's about, again, listening and changing, being changed by the incoming communities. Not saying we've always done it this way, but being changed. Finally, the stained glass window at the top now isn't the latest stained glass window that we put in. We've had to close 3 churches recently. 2 churches, and put everybody come into one parish. In one of those churches, there was a big fight to keep it open because they had an icon of a crucifix by a Hungarian artist. We've put that at the top left of the stained glass window. In the other church that had to close, they had a very beloved Pieta. And so we put that at the top right of the stained glass window. We've put images of the churches, the 3 churches in that stained glass window. We've put images of hospitals, because so many of the Irish community came over to this country to work in hospitals. So many of the African, Indian and Filipino community now come over to do the same thing. We've got a small image of a little roundel in the left-hand side of the, where you see a young girl with a hijab reading from the lectern in the church, because that's part of our makeup now as well. So it's about our story being all caught up in the same story and being changed by each other's stories and sharing eventually that same story. Now, people might say, well, they're just going to stay in the different groups if you do too much of this sort of stuff. We work with the principles of John Paul Lederach in The Moral Imagination, another book, where he takes a spider's web approach to creating communities and community cohesion. There he says, if you're going to create cohesion, you need to pick on the certain people who are influencers in the different groups and bring them together at times to share stories of who they are, what they feel about things. And when they come together and how the people listen to those stories, listen to what they're saying is important to them, they're affected by it. And when they go back out to their groups again, the web begins to form organically and naturally, so that you get a greater cohesion. But also I mentioned that when you're building relationships, interaction on its own is dangerous if you don't address the identity. If you build a bridge, you have to make sure that the foundations on both sides of that bridge are absolutely strong. You see the Clifton Suspension Bridge there. If those foundations were not deep and strong, it would collapse. I work in the marriage tribunal as well as a church lawyer, and I know from the number of people whose marriages fail because of insecurity leading to jealousy and to violence. If people are not secure in who they are, it's all too easy to go into a violent relationship, to create a violent relationship or a dysfunctional relationship. So if we're going to be building relationships and strong relationships, we've got to enable people first to be proud of who they are, to know that they are valued and important to each of us. When it comes to, again, creating community, if we take the young people, it's easier to bring them together. So there we have a junior international choir where African, Indian, and Filipino, you might see more Africans, I don't know, but African, Filipino, and Indian mixed together. I don't think there's anybody of British background there, to be honest, but that's the makeup of our church. So it's about using the young people as well to see a future in a different way. Sense of pride in the group of which people aspire to belong. That is our community, the community that's in my parish here, the places that they come from. You can see when I arrived, well, you won't know, but when I arrived here, it was an almost all white church. There are a few tiny smattering of Filipino community there and some Irish community and English community. But apart from that, and I was the youngster at 50 odd. Now I'm certainly not the youngster. And it's a very, very mixed community. Why? It's not another church in Oldham with that same makeup. It's not because of Oldham, it's because of what we do. It's not the makeup of Oldham, although I would say it is the makeup of Oldham. It's not the makeup of our churches in Oldham, but that's the makeup of our church here because of what we do. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Father Phil. Excellent as usual. I'm now going to ask Gloria to put us into groups so that we can go into discussion. What I would like is when we're in our groups, if you would choose a person to make notes of what the discussion is on and to perhaps put that into the chat facility, please. If we can have your discussion in the chat facility so that we have that at the end. If there are any specific questions you wish to put to Father Phil, put them down and we'll be back. I'm going to give you 20 minutes. So it's quite a long time, 20 minutes. If you can come back at 16:28, please. So if you return at 16:28 with the results of your discussion. Is that okay? Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being so good about returning on time. I'm now going to call on Nicole Moore, and Nicole is going to continue the same discussion on identity and ethnicity, but she's going to speak to us now from the experience of students within schools. Nicole?
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Yogi. Hi, everyone. And I've met some of you already, of course, in the breakout room. So there's no PowerPoint from me this evening. I have a recalcitrant laptop, put it that way. So I decided not to go down the PowerPoint route. So instead, I just really, this is not going to be very long. I just kind of really wanted to kind of touch on some of what has come to me by way of workshops that I've conducted. In one particular school, Mrs. Ipfel will remember that he and I were invited in to meet with the head teacher of a large boys' school in West London. I think it could have been 2016, and they didn't want a one-off kind of interaction with Kaj, and so it turned out that I went and did some in 2017 and then again in 2019, and it was happening again last year, and then the lockdown came, so it didn't happen. But primarily the initial I went for 5 weeks the first time in 2017, and it was to interact and to kind of lead workshops with boys, with students who were at risk of expulsion, exclusion, and so on. The school was very aware that it did not buck the national trend for disproportionate exclusions of Black students, but it was quite concerned about that, the school, and wanted to kind of see if there was some way they could kind of turn things around. What I remember being he kind of piqued my interest, the head teacher, when he met with Mrs. Ipfel and me the first time, because he said that he found that Black, the term, was unhelpful in the context that we were talking about. And he said he went on to explain that because the boys, when they talked about Black boys being excluded and disproportionately, you know, the expulsions and exclusions and so on, he said they were primarily boys who were of African Caribbean heritage, so born here and so on, British, Black British, but of African Caribbean heritage. He said not necessarily so much boys who came from continental African heritage. And so that, and I liked that he made that differentiation. It kind of goes back to a little bit what we, Mrs. Zipfel just mentioned, 2 boys that he had interacted with some years before, one of whom saw himself as Black British and one of whom saw himself as African. So, so I kind of had the 5 weeks with these students, and then again in 2019, different students and different year groups as well, you know, within the 12 weeks. The latter interaction in 2019 was for 12 weeks. And we did actually look at we kind of explored the theme of identity, one of the, you know, some of the workshops. And what was interesting was that boys in years 7 and 8, when asked how would they identify themselves, they really went immediately for personal characteristics. By the time you get up to years 9 and 10, and you ask, you know, like you'd have a similar workshop, we're talking about identity, how would you identify yourselves? And almost every student began with their nationality. And they did not say British. You know, I mean, the ones who were British, but most of them said Portuguese, Polish, Ethiopian, and that's how it was coming thick and fast. And I never got the impression actually that they were doing it in a kind of copycat manner. So that was interesting for me, because it said that there was that, for them, there was a kind of hyphenated, a sort of maybe a dual identity. They were born, all of the boys that I was dealing with, the majority of them were born in this country, but they would say, no, miss, I'm Ghanaian, I'm Ethiopian, and so on, and quite proud, which is a good thing. I think that what I also noticed in terms of, if we're talking about belonging, is that the boys, especially the older boys, year 9 and year 10, it seemed to me that they kind of grouped themselves. So like the boys who kind of bore allegiance to their continental African heritage, kind of, they seemed to be, you know, they kind of grouped themselves together. And then, you know, like the boys who did Spanish and Portuguese and Colombian and so on, they kind of grouped themselves together. But within when I would see them, like sort of outside of those sessions, you know, in the school surroundings, in the school playground or yard or whatever, but in the group, I mean, it took a little while, but I was often able to get them to reach an understanding that in these sessions, we are each other's keeper. And what we share here, you know, the kind of usual thing, what we share here is, you know, unless it is something that really needs to go to another person in authority, but, you know, what we're sharing is just among us, the group, and that we are to support each other. And after some time, that you know, seemed to kind of make itself more manifest. But I unfortunately never really felt that the boys, either in 2017 or in 2019, really felt as though the school held them. This is a Catholic school. I never got the impression that the boys felt that the school really was holding them as part of a you know, as part of a school family, if you like. And that for me was that was a little troubling. So I don't really feel that they necessarily felt that they belonged. And time again, you know, boys would come to me and speak to me of incidents or instances in the classroom, in classrooms where teachers were, they felt that teachers were kind of, I guess they were, the easiest thing to say would be picking on them. Sometimes they would feel it was because of, some of them felt it was because of race. And some of them felt, not that they would use the word, but kind of, because one Polish boy said, oh, I think it's because I'm Polish and also because my brothers were here, and he had older brothers who were a bit challenging in terms of their behavior and so on. But I didn't feel that they felt that they were being held in, you know, in the school family. So that was of concern. I think that one of the things that I observed as well, and this kind of harks back to something that Angela said in our breakout room, when Angela spoke about teaching boys who were Moroccan, but whom initially she felt were Jamaican because they adopted the Jamaican accent and maybe a bit of the kind of Jamaican kind of bad boy, that stereotypical kind of bad boy swagger and so on. And so I also sometimes felt that what I was observing was that some of the boys would wear their identity, not a false identity, not like the Moroccan boys, you know, being, you know, sort of trying to be Jamaican, but that they would wear their identity in a performative way. And when I say that, I mean in a performative way, usually through accent, sometimes, and through the language that they would use. It was interesting to observe. I mean, I certainly wasn't there to discourage them from doing that, but it was interesting to me why, yeah, maybe, I don't know why they felt the need to do that, but I think that I did feel that there were boys who felt sort of isolated. Yes. And sometimes the curriculum can make children feel isolated, you know. And I know that there are efforts more and more to address that. And that is something that I don't think we're ever just going to get done. It's never going to be a done deal. It's something that we as educators really will always be working on and working towards. Because it's difficult, I think, when you are in an environment. Certainly we live on this island where, I mean, I think we fool ourselves sometimes in London. I say that to my London friends all the time, you know, of all shades and sort of ethnicities and so on. We fool ourselves in London because London, you know, gives us this really multicultural vibe and all of that. And we kind of think this is it all over, but it isn't. And when you live in a place where white is default and non-white is other, then there are feelings of isolation that will inevitably, I think, be part of the fallout of that. And so I think, yeah, the curriculum can help. And I think somebody else in our breakout room spoke about that from the school in Bournemouth. You know, the curriculum can really help. And it's not it's not like every time, you know, that you have to, okay, we have like, you know, 27 different nationalities. And so we have to do, you know, a writer from every national, you know, it's not like that, but it's just bearing in mind, there are ways. I find now that we live in a time where it's so much easier now to kind of tap in. And sometimes what a student needs, what a child needs is just a kind of mention. I mean, one of the things that's always gone down a treat whenever I've done workshops, especially with younger children, is when I take a map of the world, like one of those huge maps of the world in there. And I love taking the actual map, and I'll have map monitors, and you have 4 children with their bums on, each of them with a bum on the corner of the map. And, you know, and children are so happy to tell you, oh my God, my granny is from there, my dad is from there. And that is acknowledging, you know, that's an acknowledgement. And I think it makes children feel that they belong, that they are relevant, that their story, their history, their kin, you know, is relevant. And so I think those things are important. I'd just like to share a little bit from this book. I don't know if, oh, can people see it? The Good Immigrant. Yeah, I think it's a series of essays by a plethora of ethnicities and, if you want, races, I guess. I guess.
I did refer to the two of them, Nicole, in the first talk.
Oh, you did? Okay,
did.
great. Yeah, okay. So Selena Godden, whom I've had the good fortune to meet one time, and she was very funny reading from a book of hers. She writes in her essay, "My parents are Jamaican and Irish English. My passport is British and I have lived in England all my life. My fire and spirit are pure Maroon rebel. They didn't teach us about the significance of the Maroons at school, but growing up Jamaican, it was always Black History Month at home. My grandparents wanted me to know where we all came from, how the Maroons rebelled to rise and fight against slavery. Through storytelling in the kitchen, my grandparents gave me history lessons, a map, and a time machine." She says in the playground, she kind of gives this little, she shares this. "I don't think of you as Black, not really black, not black enough, but not white enough either. You are in the playground and you keep your mouth shut as your classmates argue. She's not Black, she's brown, but she's not black, not like really black. Your plaits are too frizzy and messed up for the strawberry shortcake girls. You are too loud and bright and boisterous for them. Maybe they are too girly and pink for you anyway. They smell of Parma violets and baby powder. You smell of cocoa butter. You stay in the shade they provide. You find your own light inside. You find strength, and you are taught that you are outside." And so that's just a little bit from Selena Godden. But yes, I think one of the ways forward with having students feel a sense of belonging, I think the way forward is definitely with the curriculum. Definitely with the curriculum, how we approach the curriculum. And I think, you know, Black History Month, obviously it has its place. But as Selena Godden says, I mean, and as one of my posters says, 365 days a year, really. And I've mentioned this to Mrs. Zipfel before, that I feel saying Black history here on this island, I understand why we're using those words, but really it's British history. It's British history, that's it. That's it. You know, if we could get more people reading excerpts from Peter Fryer's book, you know, African and Asian people have been here for millennia. So it's British history. It's not like Black history. That kind of isolates it again. It's like othering it. And we're all here on this island. And, you know, we don't always all have to sing Kumbaya around a fire, but we are all here and we're sharing this space and we all belong. And I think that, you know, as I said before, the way forward with us, with our children, with our students, is through the curriculum. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. I'm going to ask Gloria to put us back into the same groupings as we had before. I wonder if I could ask this time not only to share in the discussion on what Nicole has just given us, but to relate that perhaps to what Father Phil had given us earlier, so we can have both. And can I remind you that we're really dependent upon your comments that you make in the chat facility. So please make sure you're using the chat facility. And for this discussion, you only have 10 minutes, I'm afraid. So 10 minutes. Gloria, if you can put everyone into the same grouping again, please.
when we were discussing the boys who, at a later point in their education, where they still sort of identified themselves as Jamaican. I wonder if part of that may have been because, they may have wanted to hold on to that identity and that, because that would be part and parcel of their identity. I'm just wondering if that would maybe been one of the reasons why that happened in that particular instance.
I was also thinking on that line. I don't know all the country, because usually if it is an African background, the man always wants to relate to where he comes from. They always want to say, this is where I come from and that's where your home is. So somehow I know we Nigerians, that is one thing. No matter wherever somebody is born, the son always have to have his foothold where his parents come from. So I don't know, maybe that's part of why they're not losing their identity as male or things like that. I was having that feeling, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of it. I mean, when I taught in North London, and we had students from all over the world, and some of them would have been, were first generation. They had to come over, especially I know we had a couple when she mentioned the Colombian boys, and immediately, the two boys from Colombia that we had, in our class, Juan and Gilberto, and they had, were just over with their families. Whereas some of our other students, and I think my students from Ghana, my students from Nigeria, I think their parents had probably come over and they were there for second generation. Whereas I also taught, students from Zimbabwe who'd come over with, sort of older with their parents. So, it was a real mix. But no matter where they were from, you could tell that their identity, their backgrounds were really important, and that they brought to the classroom.
And it's not just it's right across the board, isn't it? People are very proud of their roots and they want to hang on to those. People from Ireland will be very proud of their Irish roots, or Americans will be very proud of their American roots, or Australians,
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, how do we make these individuals who are so proud of the roots but still be part and parcel of the British identity as well? And I think that's quite...
I struggle. I mean, Britain is human soup. It's never been anything else. So, yeah, I think we do. I was reminded, Neville, that for the last few years with the Corpus Christi feast day, we ask parents to come in and carers with a dish of their food or their favourite food or national food or whatever it is, and we share afterwards, after the feast day mass, and that is a brilliant afternoon, isn't it? It's such a highlight with all the goodies,
and the dancing and the music.
Yeah, it's a proper it's just a proper celebration, and of course, and there's slight fluctuations depending, when families leave or whatever, but we get a very good spread, which is a big, my Irish heritage, it's all about the spread, so it's just great stuff. It's so we do, but there's a big pride in that, isn't there? And some people wear national dress even. So We need to do more of that.
Yeah, and I suppose it's acceptance of that, isn't it? It's acceptance of that that need, because it's everybody's need. It doesn't matter, you know, if you're black or white or whatever. Everybody wants to cling on to their roots. So I think it's getting people to acknowledge that and it comes up again because we did say that I'm different and my needs are different. And that's what probably we've got to get across in making sure that all those different individuals are represented within our school and within the curriculum. So we're educating our children right from the beginning that, yeah, these people are contributing, although they've come from another country, they're actually contributing to the welfare of this country, and it's getting that.
I think that's that sense of in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis talks about the need to see ourselves as a single family living in a common home, which I think is a great entry point, and obviously is part of Catholic social teaching. And what we were talking about earlier on about representation, I think as well the importance of ensuring that our curriculum and our celebrations are representative of our common family, which is even more than simply those who are currently in our school communities. Because we never, you know, I mean, because we are, that sense of representation is about seeing people from different backgrounds represented, not just seeing the people from our own backgrounds, whatever those backgrounds might be, represented. And I just think that Fratelli Tutti are just restarted recording.
Well, thank you very, very much, everybody, for coming back. May I take this opportunity to say a very, very big thank you to Father Phil for all his preparation and for an excellent talk there for us. Thank you very much, Father Phil. And thanks to Nicole, who stepped in at the very last minute and did a good job too. Thank you to both of you again. I want to ask everybody, if you have missed the previous 4 sessions, and you would like to see what went on in them, you can go to our website and find them there. So please do go to our website and you'd be able to get the previous workshops. If any of you have found this helpful, or you feel that you could make some kind of contribution yourself, please try to become a member of the Catholic Association for Racial Justice. And again, the same, if you wish to become a member, just go to the website and join in. We'd appreciate having you, and I'm sure you'd make a difference not only in the church and to society, but the world as a whole. Thank you very much to all of you for coming today. I just pray that everyone has found something in today's workshop that they can take away with them and use within your own establishments. Thank you, and God bless all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Yogi. Bye, everybody.
Yogi, is it possible to say something very quickly?
Very quickly, Nicole, you've got seconds.
Very quickly, seconds. So on the 18th of January, it will be the 40th anniversary of the fire in New Cross. And the 2nd of March will then be the 40th anniversary of what was called the Black People's Day of Action. I'm holding up a poster of a painting. So for any educators who may be interested in kind of turning their students on to a little bit of this history, maybe you can check it out, the New Cross fire and the Black People's Day of Action. And that's part of contemporary, you know, British history from the 1980s. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And if you give that to Gloria, she might put it onto our website so that people can see that from there too. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks again, everybody. God bless.
Thank you. Bye. I'm going to stop recording. Gloria, I'll send this on to you once it's done what it needs to do.
Thank you so much for your help.
It's been great. I'm really enjoying the sessions. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Bye. I'm off now. Bye.
So there weren't
For the film.
many questions came through.